Big brands are important in every branch of business, and college football is no different. So when the teams that have the biggest followings, the most tradition, and create the most revenue do well, the college football imprint grows, which in turn is pretty good for the game. Now, the cyclical nature of college football gives us big brands that fall for certain periods of time, like a Nebraska or a Tennessee, while others thrive, like Alabama and Ohio State. Now, in 20 years or 5 years or 10 years, that could be flipped all on its head. We see what Tennessee's doing. So 2022 up to this point has given us a couple resurgent candidates on each coast of the country in Florida State and USC. Now, Mike Norvell was pretty much left for dead going into his third year as the Seminoles head man, and FSU hadn't had a winning regular season since 2016. But a mixture of the growth of Jordan Travis and some additions to the roster from a depth standpoint has FSU off to a 4-0 start and a top 25 ranking. On top of that, they're getting a brand new facility, which I believe breaks ground in December, which is going to pay dividends in recruiting as well. They just got a big-time 4-star wide receiver this week. Now, the next 3 weeks will tell us all we need to know about Norvell's squad, seeing as they play 3 ranked opponents in a row in Wake Forest, NC State, and Clemson. But directly across the country, the sleeping giant that is USC seems to have been awakened after Clay Helton and the Trojans parted ways, and Lincoln Riley bounced from Oklahoma to take over the USC football program. Now, USC was a mainstay in the headlines during the offseason, and they added some dangerous skill players to the transfer portal in Caleb Williams, Mario Williams. They added Jordan Addison and Travis Dye as well. Now, we know the potential USC has, and we've seen the dynastic capabilities that can take place in University Park. The chemistry seems to be building quickly there, and after a surprising defensive win at Oregon State, the Trojans don't just look like a one-trick pony. Now, are these two former college football powers back? The season's still young, and there are huge matchups left on the table for each. So we don't know for sure yet. But the fact that we are even talking about it lets you know all you need to know anyway. You know, we always talk about how football is cyclical, and 50 years from now, everybody will be running the triple option and ask, why would you get in the shotgun from the one? It just makes no sense. Get off my lawn. But when you look and we've talked a lot about Tennessee, so I wanted to shift the focus to Florida State and USC being on separate coasts. If I had to pick one or the other, I think both are kind of hitting their stride. I'm glad to see Mike Norvell having success, but I don't know how you don't pick USC if I had to pick one of them. You're in the Pac-12. Not that the ACC is just absolutely head and shoulders and an ocean-wide gap separating them from a talent standpoint as compared to the Pac-12 or the Pac-10 now, depending on how you want to look at it. But I do think USC is more of a bigger fish in a medium pond than Florida State is in the ACC. I think with Lincoln Riley and the ability to bring guys to Southern California with what we saw under Pete Carroll, they still have some cachet left with kids that are coming out of high school now. They know who Reggie Bush is. They know who Matt Leinart is. They know who Mike Williams is. Hell, they know who Lindell White is. I know who Dominique Byrd was. I saw him make one of the best catches the tight ends made. So I do think USC can get there a little quicker. We saw them go on the road defensively against Oregon State, be able to come back in that game and win a different way than what we've seen. But once Lincoln Riley can get the offensive linemen out there and they can supplement that defensive line, not only on the exterior with pass rushers, but on the interior, so when they run into a Bama or a Georgia or an Ohio State, they're able to hold their own without having to rob Peter to pay Paul on the blitz or have to add guys in certain situations that put you in disadvantageous situations in the back end to give up big plays or not be able to stop guys on 3rd and 1. I just look at USC, Cone, and I see instant credibility at a place that with NIL as well, Los Angeles, it got Lincoln Riley to go out there with what it can offer. If you're a 17, 18-year-old kid, it's tough to go against.
I know. I mean, Southern Cal's decision to go out and spend the big money to get Lincoln Riley, I think that they're the easy answer in this scenario. But how much fun is it that we're even talking about Florida State right now? And the fact that they could be back. Look, Coach Norvell obviously was on the hot seat, but I think that, I grew up a big-time Florida State fan. I think that watching that program come back strong, You look at, they haven't had a winning season since 2016. I think Seminole fans and the administration, while maybe they didn't want to spend the big money for new renovations or whatever Jimbo Fisher wanted while he was the head coach there, I think they've seen no winning season since 2016. We don't like this. I mean, we're talking about, when you talk about both of these programs, old school blue blood powerhouses. I think both have won multiple national championships and had multiple Heisman Trophy winners just since I've been alive. You know, the Charlie Ward days, the Chris Winkie days. And as far as Southern Cal goes, I played against them in that Rose Bowl back there with that jersey right there. It was the first time we really even saw 11-up dog blitzes. I mean, Brian Cushing can go run back in coverage and cover your best receiver and come in on the blitz. So these guys have always had athletes. These programs know how to win. I don't know how both fell off so drastically. You know, I know that with Pete Carroll, they had, you know, some sanctions and things like that against them. But both programs, I think, are back. Obviously, USC is the easy answer. But you know what? I'll take Florida State. Give me Florida State coming back strong. The 10-year-old David Cohn coming out. And let's see if Florida State can compete with a Miami team that's headed by Mario Cristobal now, a Clemson with Dabo Swinney as cemented. And, you know, you have programs like Syracuse, Pitt, NC State, Wake Forest on the rise. So, I don't know. It's going to be fun to watch over the next few seasons.
No, it is. And when you look at Florida State, and we talked about the lack of the commitment to resources, and then they go ahead and make the decision. And it always looks good when you make a decision to put a new facility together and spend that money and then start off the year well.
Sure.
Those are things that go hand in hand. I believe, like I said, they break ground on that new football performance center facility, whatever you want to call it, in December to try and match what Miami's doing after Miami went to Ruiz, the local billionaire, and, you know, the on-campus stadium and the facility and things like that. Because that's where you talk about Jimbo and Miami and Florida State, I think, had fallen behind from a resource standpoint. So it is nice to see them trusting in Norvell even before this year, because there's a lot of talk, even on this show, about, hey, if it goes bad for Florida State, Deion Sanders, if mama comes calling, we think he would leave Jackson State, that HBCU, to go to Florida State. But I think what's been so intriguing about this Florida State team is it's nice to see Florida State playing organized and smart football. What has been kind of Florida State's downfall and problem? Guys trying to do too much and not just running the scheme, staying in my gap, worrying about where I need to worry instead of going to make the big play. Turnovers, Jordan Travis trying to force things, or putting Jordan Travis in a situation where you're trying to turn him into a legitimate pocket passer instead of playing to his strengths, and then just overall playing clean. I mean, when was the last time we saw Florida State beat somebody by just not losing the game? That's what they did against LSU. They let LSU make the mistakes. And I will continue to say, and I will always think that two things are true. That one, the game is won and lost up front when it comes to football. And second, most teams lose games, they don't win them. It's the art of playing consistently and playing clean and letting your opponent destroy themselves while you still play well. Those two things can happen. So I think that's why you've seen this resurgence at Florida State a little bit. And Blaine, it's easy to recruit to Florida State. It's a brand that everybody knows. Kids from Idaho know who Florida State is. Kids from New England know who Florida State is. And when Florida State's cooking, it's like Miami or LSU or some of these other places. It's a cool place to go.
You still have to have a winning season. I mean, you might be 3-0 or 4-0, but you got,
that's why I said it's
you
so
got
early.
Wake Forest, NC State, and Clemson back to back to back. All right, so
even if you go 1-3 though,
but you'll play Florida too.
You'll play Florida.
You'll play Florida.
At home.
You go to Miami. You go to Syracuse. You got Georgia Tech at home. So I mean, you beat a couple good teams. You haven't beat a ranked team yet. But we're going to find out this week. But it's still, USC's just a sexier team. I mean, they're in the Pac-12. Lincoln Riley's his first year. They haven't lost a game. Just beat a team where, you know, everyone's like, well, their defense is this, their defense is that. I know Oregon State's not the best team, but hell, you got to win games and win at 17-14. So I don't know how you don't put all your stock in the University of Southern California for the next, 5 years? I mean, Lincoln doing this his first year. I mean, obviously, it's only going to get better from here because Lincoln, he won the transfer portal, but he doesn't have his guys in there that he wants out of high school. So once Lincoln really gets his guys, especially up front on the offensive line, they're going to be a problem. I mean, their ceiling will probably be the playoffs. I mean, depending if it's a 2-3 matchup.
You talking about this year?
1-4 matchup. Well, this year and most of the years he's going to coach there, the Pac-12 doesn't play defense. And that's the difference with most of the teams you run to, the Georgia, the Bamas, Ohio State. Your offense, you're going to find great offenses in the playoff regardless. But whoever has the best defense usually comes out on top.
Yeah, well, USC's the type team, and we've seen, if the talent stays home in California, and just by default and by math, as many people that live in California, you're going to have good football players. If they're able to keep the talent in state to be able to stay there, and I'm talking about up front, USC is a place where the expectation and the standard isn't just to get to the playoff.
Yeah.
And they have the capability to get there and have a team that can not only compete against the Alabamas and Georgias, but to win, even on the West Coast. They are, when I think about West Coast football powers, USC is the first one that pops in my head. And it stands alone. I mean, second to me, we can talk about, Oregon. You could throw Washington in there. We could talk about Utah. You could talk about BYU, teams like that, but it's USC for me.
No, it is USC. But if you're Florida State in this scenario, at least you can say, well, the state of Florida is just as good in recruiting. Now you're going to have to compete against
per capita, it's better.
You're going to have to compete against the Hurricanes and the Gators and, even every school wants to go down into Florida and recruit. But at least you can say, look, our state is just as good at recruiting. Let's put a fence around our area as well. But I do agree with you. When you're talking about just the per capita, the population size of California and the fact that Southern Cal is that first brand that I think of when it comes to college football on the West Coast.
All right, guys, if you like what you're watching, like what you're hearing, make sure you're subscribed to Crane & Company on our YouTube channel. Hit that like button as well on all the videos and turn that bell on for notifications every time we go live. Each morning, each weekend, everything's covered only on Crane & Company.